It's really lovely to have you, as I said. So let's talk a little bit then today about the nightmare boss and what the nightmare boss might mean for you in your daily work. And also, I suppose, more importantly, what you can do about the nightmare boss. One of the key things I find in working with people and obviously doing a lot of leadership development and team development in organizations across various countries around the world is the issue that often bosses are a nightmare. And when I'm talking about a nightmare, I mean, at the end of the day, what the research says is that the one single person that most affects us in our working lives overall is essentially our leader, our team leader, our supervisor, our boss, whatever it is. But they're the most important person to whether we are happy at work or whether we struggle at work. So I think it's a really important question around what kind of boss do you have? And are they a nightmare boss or are they not? So let's just get into the webinar, talk about a couple of things. Do you struggle to deal with increasing pressures on you as a leader and maybe lack the skills to deal with a nightmare boss? Do you find yourself working under a crazy person called a boss? Do you actually feel anxious going to work sometimes? And do you sometimes feel as if you've lost your confidence at work because you're working for a crazy person? So when I'm talking the very first one, do you struggle to deal with increasing pressure on you as a leader? It doesn't have to be on you as a leader. It could just maybe be on you as a team member. What I'm really asking is that, do you find going to work quite stressful for you because the boss who you're working with is a difficult person? And I mean, would you like to go to work free from stress and feel happy? Would you like to really thrive in your role? And often we don't thrive in our role because we've got a psycho boss, as I call them. Would you like to know that you're supported by a great boss and the team around you? Would you like to feel as if you're doing well in your role and achieving your goals? And it's really hard, ladies and gentlemen, to do well in your role or achieve your goals if you've got a boss who is not nice or micromanages you or is rude to you or is unsupportive. And I mean, ultimately, I'm presuming you're on this webinar because you would like to learn about more how to deal with difficult people, including a nightmare boss. Just wanted to ask you this question because I think it's an important question. Could your nightmare boss be more your perspective, or are they truly a nightmare? So quite often it could be, for example, we're going through a difficult time, we're feeling a bit sensitive at the moment. And I guess what I'm asking is it maybe just your perception that they're a nightmare boss, and maybe sometimes are you just responding or reacting to this person in a way that's making it worse? Or do you actually feel, sorry, Karen, that's a great question, but at the end of the day, this is a nightmare boss. So if you've got any questions or any comments about your nightmare boss, please feel free to pop your questions in the question doc, and I'll answer them and talk about them as we go through the webinar. A nightmare boss can basically cost you your health. I think this is an important point that I want to raise because I know that, you know, when you consider how much time we spend at work, how much time we spend with each other, you know, we're spending 8 to 10 to 12 hours depending on your job and depending on the work that you do at work. And if you're working for somebody who's unresponsive or moody or rude, we'll go through the different types of difficult boss in a moment. It can be so debilitating. And I think we need to understand that actually there is a time that may come where you need to walk away from the role in organization in search for greater peace and ultimately sanity. How many people do I work with over the years, honestly, that they've stayed in this job because they love the job, they love the people, and yet they've been working under a manager or a boss who's just an absolute nightmare. And at the end of it, you find that, you know, they're stressed, they've got depression, they're anxious, and they're becoming more psycho themselves in trying to deal with the psycho boss. And I want to say at the outset, you know what? My experience in my life is this. No role or no boss is worth your sanity or your health. That's just as simple as I want to make that comment. So if you need to work help with this person or others like them, I always like to say at the top, sometimes we need a new perspective, fresh eyes. For those of you who would like to, I'm happy to give you the opportunity to have a one-on-one with me sometime over the next couple of days. And we'll talk about that at the end of the webinar. It's absolutely free. There's no cost involved in that. But please don't book yourself in if you're not really that serious about it, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to really know a little bit more about this and you want to learn how to deal with this sort of boss or difficult people, that's when I say book in. But if you're not sure or not ready, then please don't, because there's other people who probably need that time with me more desperately, I guess, than you may. So, all right, then let's just, if you have a look at, I mean, so what are the types of nightmare bosses? Well, here they are, all 6. And as I go through these particular types of nightmare bosses, some of you might say, oh my gosh, Karen, do they have to be one or can they be all? I promise you, I swear I've seen one of them as all of them. You know, one guy I used to work with was just a walking nightmare. And I'll explain a little bit more about him as we go through these types. But essentially, he was a smiling assassin, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. So here we go, number 1, always angry, always throws things, always grumpy, always moody, an absolute nightmare to be around. And generally, if they are happy, it's because things have been done for them. They're just generally unpleasant. You might say, well, are bosses always angry? Well, I've worked with many, many men and women over the years, and it's really interesting. I'll share something quickly with you. I actually find in some situations women are more angry and worse bosses than men are. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean just now. The completely clueless boss. So this is the boss who says things, does things, has no idea of the impact of what they're doing or saying, completely self-unaware, could be, you know, technically unaware in their role, but more so, I think people generally don't get into jobs because they're lacking in competence. People generally don't do their jobs well because they don't manage people around them well, or they don't have good relationship skills. And often the completely clueless bosses, they might be technically quite good, but when it comes to relationships, absolutely clueless. So they're unemotionally, you know, they're emotionally unintelligent, they don't say the right thing, they say inappropriate things, they behave in a bad way or an insensitive way, completely clueless. And I've found far too many of them in my role as coach, particularly, and I might say to you this to you, at executive level. So when I'm talking about CEOs, even at board level, just clueless. The ever critical. So nothing you do is okay. Nothing you do is good enough. Nothing you do is right. If they've got something to say, they'll say it. Sometimes they say it even publicly. You know, you haven't done this right. You haven't done that right. And when I come across those bosses that criticize their people publicly, I literally feel my skin crawl. Of all of the boss types, or all of the behaviors and attributes of a great boss, one of the things I always say is never ever criticize your people publicly. If you have some feedback to do, number 1 is to think about the method in which you give feedback, but the second thing is to think about where you're going to give the feedback. And essentially, if you're going to give feedback, you never do it in a way that's going to be distressing or, you know, debilitating to the person who you give the feedback. So the ever critical boss is certainly not one of my favorite. Unfortunately, too many of them. That I'm not nice to your face and talk about you behind your back. Or the other one is I'm nice to your face and talk about you behind your back. And I generally call those the smiling assassins. The problem with those ones is that you never know what they're doing. You know, they're nice to your face, but they're not nice behind your back. I used to work with this gentleman who was in a very senior role, and this was probably about 20 years ago maybe, and he was as nice as pie to me. He used to tell me that I was the one who was going to be, you know, the next senior manager, and I would take his role when he was promoted. He was sort of second in command, and he was just so delightful. He was lovely to work for to my face. But what I really found was really disconcerting was that I had a friend of mine who actually sat on the board of that organization. He used to tell me that when this man, let's call him John for argument's sake, would go to the board meetings, he would just absolutely crucify me in the board meetings. And I was always quite hurt by that until I figured out, it took me a little bit, a while, but I figured out the reason why he's doing it is because he was threatened that I would take his job. So I actually confronted him about it. He denied it, and I told him that he was fibbing to me. Anyway, I'll tell you that story as we go through the presentation this morning. The totally disorganized boss is he just can't get things, you know, loses things, loses keys, always late for meetings, loses notes, forgets things, etc., etc. And those are the people who generally need not 1, but 2 or 3 or 4 PAs or EAs, because they just don't get things done. And what's really interesting about those bosses is that very often they'll actually rely on those people, often team members, to pick up their slack because they're not organized, so other people around them need to be. So there you go. And of course, I suppose if I asked you, well, you know, have you got others? I'm sure you have got others. I'm sure you could say, well, one that's, you know, sometimes nice, sometimes not nice. I call them the unpredictable boss. You've got some who are absolutely calm and wonderful, and then they erupt like, Mount Vesuvius, and I'm sure you know some of those. So they're unpredictable. You never kind of know what you're going to get. One moment they're nice, the next moment they're not. And those are people who I think psychologically destroy those members who are, teams of theirs. So because you just don't know what you're dealing with. And so the team members that then work with those bosses are never sure what's going to walk in the door that day. And because they're never sure what's going to walk in the door, ultimately you start to get a culture in the team of nervousness, anxiety, people scared to say things. So you start to get a culture of power and blame. 4 different types of organizational cultures. So power, role, achievement, and support. And essentially what you're looking for to be highly performing teams are cultures around predominantly achievement and support. But when you've got a boss who you never know how they're going to act, often you have the culture around power and fear, lots of fear in those sort of organizations. So should you be listening to me, there's a lot of you on the line, as I said. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. My name is Karen Walsh. I'm a psychologist by training. I work on 3 continents. I'm working in Africa. I do a lot of work in Fiji, and I work obviously in Australia. I run a company called Pure Magic International Business Solutions. So we do leadership and people development. Absolutely love my work. Been doing it for over 25 years. My firm focuses on developing, obviously, CEOs, leaders, and teams. 2016, I coached 7 CEOs, and the reason I tell you is because one of them I coached was awarded the 2017 CEO of the Year award. That was just the most amazing thrill. She was just lovely. Won a couple of awards nationally and internationally. I'm not sure that that's important, but some people find that interesting to know. And I do a lot of keynote speaking across all industries in 3 continents. So lots of work and background in leadership and team development and coaching. These are some of the companies that we've worked with over the years and still do. Some of them I still work with these organizations. It was interesting because in 2000, after I had worked with more than 20 clients or patients in 1 week, I realized, because I was doing some counseling at the same time as doing leadership development and supervision, and when I actually looked at when I was, doing some work around helping people who came to see me because their lives weren't working, I realized that actually my mission really was to work in organizations at the time, because the source of anxiety and mental health issues that I was seeing in my room seemed more in the workplace actually than at home. People would talk to me about a boss who didn't listen, teams that weren't working together, and workplace conflict and a lack of direction. And I actually realized I would probably make more impact in organizations, even in groups, for example, with teams or different departments, than I did one-on-one. And so in some way, even though I do individual work still, I think I get more enjoyment from working in groups in some way, because I think that's how you can make more impact. I launched into speaking at conferences, as I said, working in organizations, and just some pictures of the organizations I work with and some of the fun stuff I do. Fun it looks like, but it's also quite tiring. So a nightmare boss can make all the bad difference to you and how you are in your life. You can throw money, prestige, opportunity, and excellent rewards at people to increase their engagement and motivation, but nothing will make a difference if they're stuck under a lousy boss. How many times have I said that? You can motivate, you can pay more, you can try and get people engaged, but if they're working for somebody who doesn't support them, recognize them, help them, validate them, they're not going anywhere. And so many organizations lose good people because they're stuck under bosses who are nightmares. People lose motivation and interest, and what happens? Well, profitability walks out the door. And it's really sad, ladies and gentlemen, because many organizations are really trying their hardest to do well, to do the right thing. Some of them humanitarian, wanting to make a difference to the world. Some of them are, in the not-for-profit. Some of them obviously in the profit. But many organizations obviously try their hardest. But if you've got 1 or 2 bad boss eggs, it can make a world of difference to who stays and who goes. So if we have a look at the nightmare boss checklist, I love this boss checklist. They never greet their people or do so occasionally. Now, obviously, this might not be your boss or the bosses that you've experienced in the past, but these classically are the things that we would talk about as nightmare boss checklists. They get angry quickly and shout and scream, you know, the hissy fit kind of boss. And really what I say they are is that they're just children in big bodies, inappropriate behavior, the kind of stuff that you'd see a tantrum, temper tantrum, and you'd see that largely in the kindergarten area. Unpredictable, as I said, one moment they're calm, the next they're fiery. They get their people to do what they're not prepared to do themselves. I say the best leaders are those people who go and clean the toilets, or who they'll go and, you know, wash the dishes. Nothing for a good leader is beneath that leader. And I think that's one of the key outcomes of leadership, that you're prepared to do what you ask your people to do. This is a no-no for me, a big no-no. And I have been coaching CEOs. In fact, there was a CEO last week I was coaching, and I was happened to sit in a team meeting with this particular CEO and some of his members. Anyway, one of the team members had done the wrong thing, and he just got really angry. I think he's a person who doesn't know how to manage his emotions well. By the way, we call that emotional unintelligence. And he just told him how incompetent he was in front of everybody else. And as I sat there and watched this, I saw him realize what he had done. And he sort of then looked at me and apologized to this person. But in my debriefing with him afterwards, I said to him, you know, I could work with you until I'm 95 and, you know, you're 90. But if you're going to continue behavior like that, I can't help you. And secondly, you will never be a fantastic leader. So it's one of the things I'm really, really, really emphatic about. No public criticism, because you can't motivate people if you criticize them. You know, what's the saying, ladies and gentlemen? You attract more bees with honey than with vinegar. Or they talk about their people to other managers or staff. And I always say one of my mother's lessons to me as a little girl was, Karen, if you have nothing nice to say, say nothing. And I say this to leaders. If you've got nothing nice to say about your team, say nothing. But if you want to say lots and lots of good things, that's absolutely fantastic. The other thing I think from a psychological perspective is this. If you're talking to, let's say, another leader who might be on the same level of you in your organization, but they're criticizing their people, that says a lot about them. In fact, it says more about them than it does about their team. What does it say? That they're not leading as well as they should. They don't have their team under control. They're not communicating with their team because they see their team as out of control. Yet if you've got a team that's out of control, where's the real issue? It's called leadership. That's where the real problem is. They growl a lot at you or others, you know, the sort of leader, and they'll never, ever really generally thrive. Although what's interesting about these guys or girls is that historically you actually find a lot of them at the top of organizations. Less so now because of, you know, workers' comp and, you know, bullying and anti-harassment, etc. at work. But you certainly still get your fair deal with them, or favoritism. So they don't play fair, different rules for different people. And these are all your different kind of checklists that go for nightmare bosses. No fun with a bad boss. You spend so much time at work, you might as well enjoy it. And as I said earlier, I think they affect your sanity, your happiness, and ultimately, you know what? They affect your life. And you don't get paid enough money to take this sort of behavior. I also appreciate that some of you might be in small rural areas, and therefore that means that jobs might be harder to come by. So when you are in that situation, you have two choices. Either you cop it sweet and you let those bad behaviors roll off you. In other words, you become more thick-skinned around this bad behavior, or you look for something more suitable. And obviously this could be in city organizations as well, but I'm just saying that very often in regional areas it's harder to get work. So people tend to stay in jobs even though the behaviors of their bosses are bad, and even though it's actually affecting their health. So, and if the big bad boss is the person in big charge, like, you know, your CEO or your executive officer, honestly, and if you've tried everything you can, I honestly encourage you, get out, because as I said earlier, nothing is worth it. You're worth far more than a big boss will give you. So just some of those things to think about. And, you know, why are you on this call today? There's obviously no doubt in my mind that either each of you have got a boss issue, or each of you have had experience in working with a boss in the past who has been badly behaved or revolting, and it's affected you in some way. Or you might be somebody who's studying part-time and you're interested to know how to deal with the situation. But at the end of the day, big bad bosses are no fun. So let's say we help 3 organizations resolve the nightmare boss problems. and it depends on the organization. These issues, even though I'm throwing them across different organizations, are basically situations whereby it could happen in the same organization. So here you've got the inconsistent hot cold boss. Boss walks in the door, staff can see how they're on the day. What's really interesting with some teams that we work with is that the staff can actually, the way that let's just say that the boss arrives and they can see how they park their car, right? So that they've got a window looking at the boss getting out of the car and how they actually grab their briefcase, for example, and then walk up the stairs into the office. The team can tell me what they're going to get on that day. He's going to greet us today, or she's going to ignore us today. That's how great, how adept they are at reading their boss's body language before the boss even gets in the door. Some of them, this was really funny. A team I was working with a couple of months ago, they take bets about what boss they will get on any particular day. I mean, what is that? That's insane, where people can actually say, oh, they're going to be grumpy boss today, they're going to be happy boss today. That's how predictable they are. Will he greet them today? Is it the normal ignoring? Will he walk in and just not say hello? Here's the thing, right? Besides being really, really bad leadership, if you don't acknowledge or talk to or greet the team that's actually working with you to help you achieve your goals, it's just downright rude. I just find it absolutely disgraceful where you've got people in any organization, and really it doesn't matter what level, but you greet people, don't you? Well, I don't know. That's how I was raised. If I walk past somebody, even if I don't know them, I greet them. It's just courtesy. And the staff often get conflicted. They hate the boss, but they love the job. So what are we going to do, Karen? I want to stay. I love my team. I love what I do. I love my clients. I can't stand the boss, the inconsistent, hot, cold person, who walks in every day. So others look on Seek as a normal daily event. How often have I worked with people or coached people who are on Seek all the time? And, it's really sad, because when I come back to the same thing all the time, which is this, is that great organizations lose fantastic people because bosses, nightmare bosses, don't know how to behave well because they don't understand what leadership really is like. And the results are great staff walk out the door, other staff, so over the boss attitude. I'm so over their attitude, Karen. So they don't engage. They don't go to the Christmas parties. I'm so over the bosses tantruming that they don't, engage in a Friday night drink, or, they don't get involved in staff discussions because they just are tired of the petulant behavior of the manager. Productivity goes down. Well, of course it does. Staff start to behave like the boss at times. There was a really interesting example the other day where this was actually overseas, where I walked into this organization and we were called in because the boss was the problem. But I'll tell you what was really interesting was the boss was the problem. There were 9 people in the team with the boss, and 3 of the people in the team were the little bosses. In other words, they were behaving just as badly as the boss. And I just thought to myself, well, that's exactly it. So the role modeling of the boss has allowed the other people in the organization, in the team, to be equally as badly behaved. That can't happen. That's got to stop. Organization, this was the second one, but as I said, when I started, it would be the same one. Insulting and belittling staff in front of others. So I've just used Bob's Hardware Limited. Now, Bob's Hardware is a made-up organization, obviously. But, it was just amazing that people do this. So at a team meeting, I think I gave you the story, boss was unhappy with, let's say, Samantha, tells her in front of others she's incompetent and she should not be in her role, then ignores her for the rest of the meeting. Now, that's not even bad leadership, ladies and gentlemen. That's not leadership. It's not even, I can't even use the word leadership in the same mouthful, but it's more around just bad, rude, inappropriate behavior. You just don't do that. And so what then is, obviously nobody wanted to talk in meetings. Well, of course they didn't. People became fearful, no wonder. No enjoyment in their roles, well, that's pretty duh. And a culture of fear and blame arises. And then, of course, what often happens is that we get a call from the CEO, or I get a call from that manager saying, I've got this most difficult situation with my team. They don't listen. They go against me. I've only got 2 or 3 people who really love their roles and are good to lead or good to manage. Karen, can you come in and help us sort out the rest of the team? Go in and do that. But the actual problem is the boss and the boss's attitude. And yet the really interesting thing is that the boss has no self-awareness around that. And of course, the staff are too fearful to tell the boss how they feel in case of, some sort of kickback or some sort of recrimination against them. And then what you've got is that you've got unhappy people, a culture of fear and blame, and we go nowhere in a hurry. And I'm sure, because there's a lot of you on the line, but even if there weren't as many as you are, I'm sure that you know exactly what I'm talking about. And there would be a certain percentage of you right now, ladies and gentlemen, who are in the situation I'm talking about. Number 3, we are failing as a team because you, not me, as your boss. So you've got the manager or the boss who, a nightmare situation, who will blame their team for not doing the right thing. And therefore they tell their boss, who the big boss, well, I'm actually not getting my job done because, the team that I'm leading is a dysfunctional team. They're incompetent and, they're not very motivated. Well, that might be the case, but why are they dysfunctional? Why are they not motivated? And why are they incompetent? At the end of the day, all of this stuff comes down to effective leadership. So if you've got a CEO who's being told by the boss, I'm not good at this because of my team, if I was the CEO, I'd be saying, I'm sorry, I don't think your team's the problem, because if they are the problem, upskill them, train them, or move them into another area where they are good, and get yourself a team that really thrives. So what you've got is a nightmare attitude of a nightmare boss. The boss takes no responsibility, blames the team for failing, and uses every opportunity to tell the boss, their boss or their board, that he doesn't succeed because the team's not up to speed. And then what happens? Well, of course, the team becomes demoralized over time. Team members left and went elsewhere. No surprise there. The department's goals were not achieved. The organization suffered, and ultimately the nightmare boss was fired, which is really interesting because here's the thing. The nightmare boss on this occasion felt that they weren't the problems ever, as I've explained. They felt that their team was. And yet what was interesting in this particular organization is that it was, I think, quite well known that the nightmare boss was the problem. But it took over 1.5 years for the executive team, and we had come in then at this stage, and I'd said to the CEO, I think we've got an issue with the manager, really, in terms of attitude. It took them another 1.5 years to do something with that nightmare boss. And of course, what had happened was that there had been so much damage done at that stage that many people were lost, and actually the whole department was on its knees. So when we talk about where does the issue lie, it lies in leadership. And if we leave nightmare bosses in their positions, it's just going to get worse. It does never, ever get better. So this one was, I love this one, John's Juice Company. Again, that's a fictitious organization. But our boss throws us under the bus. Nightmare boss, always angry, unsupportive, nice to your face. I explained this particular one. When things don't work, it's another person's problem. When things thrive, the boss takes the praise. So this particular boss, there was a project that had to be done. And it's another organization I'm thinking about. And this particular team, let's just say they had a $50,000 budget to complete something, and they had to complete it by the 1st of March. Let's just say, right? So what happened with this nightmare boss is they went over budget by, I think it was $30,000. So it cost them $80,000, but they also then finished it by the 1st of May. So let's just say it was a month or 2 months late. And I was actually sitting in a meeting with the top executives, and just, I was actually working at the top level of this organization. This boss came into the meeting and threw his team under the bus. What do I mean by that? He actually said at the meeting that the reason why they didn't stick to schedule or stick to budget was because his team had blown it out. And I remember thinking, how could you say that? How could you do that? And he lost a lot of credibility. What he should have done was apologized. What he should have done was prepared reasons and an understanding for the executive team as to why that had happened, but then have taken full responsibility. And what was really interesting was because he didn't take responsibility, he got a sort of a hard time given to him by the CEO, and the board then essentially decided that they had lost confidence in him, which I thought was really interesting because he had felt that he, wasn't the problem and his team was the problem. So note, the board didn't lose confidence in his team, ladies and gentlemen. The board lost confidence in him as a senior manager, and he was then moved out of the organization. And I just remember thinking, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about blaming your team? Really, really not a good way to go. And the outcome, well, there you go, staff were unsupported, lost confidence, half the team resigned, which is why we were called in at a later stage, unhappy staff, unhappy profits. So what do we do with these things? So how do we fix these issues? And obviously that's why you're on this webinar today. So here what we do, what I find in a lot of organizations, and obviously when I make the comments I'm about to make, it's easy for me to make these comments because I'm not sitting under these nightmare bosses. But one of the key things I want you to consider here is this. If you do nothing, either individually or collectively, just know that nothing will change. Just know that in some way, potentially, it's going to get worse. So you either put up with it, or you do something about it, or you leave. So in my experience of doing this for over 2 decades, you really have 3 choices, and those are they. So you can approach the boss directly, individually, or as a team, and basically explain the impact of the inconsistent behavior on the team or on you as an individual. Now, this is where most people say, oh, I don't want to do that individually. Then I say, okay, if you don't want to do it individually, then do it collectively. That is obviously if the boss is being inconsistent or rude to all of you as a team as opposed to you individually. So that's something you could do. Obviously, you could go to HR. Obviously, you could seek out another mentor in the organization. But what I'm saying here and what I'm actually trying to address with you is if you do nothing, then don't expect anything to change. And if you do nothing, then there's no point in moaning about it because nothing has been resolved. What we obviously do is we come from a different perspective. We actually discussed the situation with the CEO. We had a discussion with the nightmare boss, and we trained the leadership team, coached him to understand leadership. And on this particular occasion, which was really interesting, I think it would be fair to say that he certainly improved. He got a much better understanding as to how his behavior was impacting his team. But I still did not feel that he was really leadership material. I still didn't feel that he should be supervising or managing other people or staff. And I remember making that comment to the CEO. And without getting into the details or, being sort of specific about what happened, essentially he was actually moved out of a line management role in time and put into a more technical role, which is actually where I think he was better suited. The outcomes are then they got another boss and the productivity increased by 37% in 9 months in this particular team. And you can see that the team actually thrived without him. The next one is insulting and belittling publicly. What you can do, again, it's easy for me again to say don't take it personally, but if you take it personally, you can become quite crushed under somebody like this. Just understand the psychology of the nightmare boss. Often people become nightmare bosses because on some level they are threatened, they have a sense of inadequacy. Generally, people who are nightmare bosses are unhappy people. You don't criticize or are rude or are inconsistent or throw your team under the bus if you're a person generally who's happy and easygoing. I often find, even, in my psychology counseling and in my coaching at executive level, generally people who don't lead well in the frame of nightmare bosses are people who are unhappy. And so even though it's easy for me to say, don't take it personally, what I'm trying to say to you is that I believe that very often it's much more about them than it is about you. So try not to take it too personally if it's possible. Tell the boss the impact of their behavior on you. So, Jim, you might not be aware of this, but I would like to share something with you. Well, what is it, Karen? Well, yesterday when you shouted at me in front of the team, I felt really uncomfortable and quite upset about it. And the impact is that it makes me feel really uncomfortable. It makes me feel as if I don't contribute, and I'd like you to stop it. So you might say, oh, I couldn't do that because I might lose my job, and I appreciate that that could be a problem. But coming back to if you do nothing, remember, nothing's going to change. Involve HR if necessary. Obviously, what we did is, this is a really important point, is that we designed a code of conduct with the team. Most organizations have a code of conduct which sits on the wall in the reception or, behind the HR manager's door. Codes of conduct, I don't think, are used very well in organizations. So if you have a code of conduct, for example, if you have one team where the problem is really marked, then what I do when we go in is we get the team to design a whole new code of conduct, including the leader. and then we get each of the team members to assess each other twice a year around the code of conduct. And then obviously those aspects of the code of conduct are attached to their position descriptions and their KPIs. So you actually make the code of conduct become a KPI outcome. And by that, we then put boundaries around behaviors of all team members. So things like we will be supportive and, we will be encouraging of each other. So if team members are not doing that, then we use the code of conduct to call them on those behaviors. And on this particular thing, we also coach the boss in interpersonal skills. He definitely got better. I think he still has a long way to go. So those are some things you can do. This is actually, we throw obviously in a little bit of a reference. This is a really great guy. He is a really, really interesting man. He's Austrian born. He is the CEO of a place, of an island that we worked on called Ladala Island in Fiji. And it's actually owned by Red Bull, the drink. And we had the opportunity as Pure Magic to work with he and his team on the island. And I'll share this with you. It was probably the most beautiful scene I've ever worked on. But the organization when we went in had its human issues, as we all do, and we did some great work with them. So this is the number 3 is my team fails, not me. So what can you do? Discuss with the boss how you feel, as I said earlier. Talk about solutions as a team. Speak to HR about behavior and stand firm as a team. So what I mean by that is that if you see the boss criticize one of the team and you as a team are standing firm, then I think it's about taking the boss on, where you say, we've got this code of conduct and we standing firm as a team. What we want is respect, and what we want us all to get along well, but don't allow that boss or another team member to criticize anybody. So what we eventually did from another perspective, we did a staff survey. We implemented a top teams training program. We recently redid the staff survey and the morale is up 76%, as you can see. So we actually came at from a different perspective, but we coming in as outsiders, those are the things you can do inside the organization. They might not always work, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, but as I say, if you don't do anything about it, nothing's going to change. There's 4 techniques you can use, and then I'm going to get into a whole range of other things you can do as well. Don't take the behavior. It will wear your soul down. As I said, I know it's easy to say. Approach the boss and tell them about the impact of their behavior on you, either individually or as a team. Seek the support of other senior people in the organization, and ultimately think logically, not emotionally. The issue is them, not you. Now, if the person in the organization is your CEO, if your person in the organization is the person actually driving the bus, again, come around to thinking about, well, should I actually be on this bus in the first place? But if you decide I want to stay and try and change the culture of the team, then you can't do it without the inclusion of HR, people and culture, learning and development. Some organizations, some people, team members are driven to unions. I appreciate that sometimes you have to go to those distances, but I really prefer where people in teams try and resolve those issues with their managers themselves. But I'm also switched on enough to know that it doesn't always work that way, because, the more, what I find? I find sometimes that people get, when they get a bit of power, they change. Well, I've got the power now to tell you what to do and where you've got to go and what what I want you to do. And I think that the most exceptional bosses are those who have so much power but give the power back to their team. They empower their people, they're supportive of their people, they are bosses who encourage their staff to thrive and to shine. Those are the bosses that really, I think, thrive in today's world, not the nightmare bosses or the 6 types that I've explained. No job's worth being bullied around, because that's a nightmare boss is a bully, whichever way we look at it, really. So what you can do, meet your goals. I think this is an important point. Never give your boss the opportunity to criticize you. Do what you're supposed to do, meet your goals, perform your role well, act professionally at all times. So rise above whatever it is that they dish out. Yes, it's difficult. I appreciate that. But I think what I'm saying is always behave in an exemplary manner and always do your job in a fantastic way that you're paid to do. The other thing is to find a positive mentor in the organization who can be there to guide you. Very often, if you've got a positive mentor in other parts of the organization, and they know what's going on, what I've found in many organizations is often the powerful mentors who might be not in your department or in your, function. For example, you might, if let's say that you're in sales, you might have a mentor who's in operations. And they might be peers of this boss that you've got. Very often I find then that the mentors in other departments tend to resolve the issue for you. And what I mean by that is that, other bosses at the same level as your nightmare boss tend to start putting the pressure on the CEO or start putting the pressure on other people around this nightmare boss, including HR, stroke leader, people and culture to deal with the issue. So it's like gathering the forces, if you like. Again, I've said approach your boss calmly and being assertive, explain the impact of the behavior. Keep a journal of incidents. Now, you might say, oh, do we need to? Yes, you do need to, because if you don't do so, should anything go pear-shaped, it could cost you. And I think if you do have a list of things that have been done, over time and have affected you in ways, it's important to have some sort of record as to what those things are. Keep abreast of other openings, obviously within the organization and outside of the organization. The thing I think that's sad about that comment is that, you could be really good at your job and love what you do, but because you've got a boss who isn't being, what's the word I look for? Coached is such a nice word to use, to behave in a much more appropriate and better way, you've got to pay the price for that. And I think therefore you've got to move out of a role that you're really good at and really love. Network as much as you possibly can. I think that the more we network in professions and in business today, the better off we are, because you never know what opportunities there are. Don't go and talk about your boss's boss unless it's a last resort. Don't go and talk to your boss's boss unless it's a last resort, because then you're going above the organizational line. But you know what? I also am very, very encouraging of people to do it if you, for example, have been complaining to your boss about their behavior and nothing's changed, then I say go out and try and find all the support you can, because you're going to need it. This was the CEO I coached. She got the CEO of the year. Her name's Viv Allenson, and she's the most inspiring person to work with. And she's the most fantastic boss. She's inclusive. She's fun. She gives her team the most amazing power to do things. She really is exemplary. Her name is Viv Allenson. She's an absolute legend as a CEO. And when I actually coach CEOs, I really try and get them to be more like her. She's wonderful. So there you have it. There's lots of things you can do, but the most important thing I want you to think about, looking after yourself and your emotional, mental, and physical health. It's really important, because I think sometimes we become so desensitized to bad bosses, we just take their nonsense. And I don't want you to do that. I really don't want you to do that, because it's going to cost you. And that's what we teach when we're running our 31-day management staff programs, or even in our leadership programs, things around how do you lead and what does good leadership look like? And even if you're a team player, what is it to be a good team player? And if you see, for example, one of your team members being bullied by a nightmare boss, there's a lot of team members who won't do much about it, because rightfully they're fearful that if they do something about that, they're going to be next. And I so appreciate that. Why wouldn't they be fearful? But here's the thing. If you stand by and watch your team member being, controlled and spoken badly to by a nightmare boss, something to think about is, if that person leaves, that team member leaves, you might be next. So I always say when I'm in organizations, stand together thick as a team and really, really support each other, so that if the boss then starts being really mean to somebody, it's not that they're going to be mean to one individual, because you're now going to take the team on. And I think it's a very solid way of being in a team. So there's a free ebook on our website if you'd like to go to our website, which is obviously there. I would love to connect with you. What you can also do is book in for your free strategic review. So there is the time trade link. In fact, what I'm going to do, because the link changes, obviously as we move through each week, we've got to change the time trade link. So This was changed last week, and I'm not sure if MJ has changed it. But what I will do is I will either myself or MJ will, she's actually on leave at the moment, so I might do it, is I will send you a link to the time trade in an email when the webinar is completed. And come on, have a chat. Talk to me about what's going on in your organization. Talk to me about what's going on in your team. Really happy to help. And obviously, if I feel that we can help you in any way or come into your organization to assist, we certainly will. We do it for countless other organizations, so there's no reasons why we shouldn't be able to do it with you. So are there any questions that you may have of me right now? If you'd like to pop them in the box, really happy to answer them. Okay, so here I have a question from Audrey. Thank you, Audrey, for your question. And this is about a female boss. Why are female bosses so bitchy at times is the question. Interesting question. I think it's a really interesting dilemma we have. You know, the other part of my life is I run a program called Empowering Women to Thrive. And we're just in the process right now of uploading a 9-stage program called Be Unstoppable, Empowering Women to Thrive Around the World. And we've got about 1,500 women registered to go onto the program already. Why do I share that information with you? Because I think that some of the worst cases of nightmare bosses are women. And why is that? Why are we women of women, actually? So women bosses of women team members. And what is that based on? You know, to be an effective boss, it's around obviously being good at your job, but it's about being great at the relationships, having respectful, honest, positive relationships filled with integrity and praise of the team. So if you are a female boss and you've got somebody in your team that is not competent or who is not performing, of course the issue is the person who's not doing the job well, but the real issue is the leader, therefore her. So it then reflects on the leader's ability. But when we have women in roles, what I often find is that they become more bitchy because I think women are in some way fearful, threatened by, insecure, uncertain of other people in their team who they see as maybe people with high potential, maybe team members who have a lot of ability to go far. And when I think of women leaders on female team leaders, I honestly believe that that's the general crux of the matter as a psychologist. I think women leaders become bitchy because they struggle with an innate sense of inadequacy. And I think it's unacceptable. So now let's take the gender out of it. Nightmare bosses generally don't know how to lead. They generally don't have great emotional control, i.e. are not emotionally intelligent and don't have great relationship skills. So they criticize, they blame, they are rude to all the things I've been talking to you about this morning to their team members. And ultimately what you've got is that it's really a leadership issue that manifests in a nightmare boss. And because they don't know how to do it, ultimately you've got team members who are really unhappy and leave. So I hope I've answered your question, Audrey. It was, I've been around I've gone around it in a long way, but I think nightmare bosses, as I say, psychologically are stuck with inadequacy, insecurity, and uncertainty. Can you resolve those issues? Absolutely you can. How? Through coaching, through development, but specifically targeted development programs at those issues, as opposed to popping them off into a leadership program. Because leadership programs obviously are there to get some outcomes and to upskill your leaders into particular areas. But that's where I think coaching comes in to actually tailor whatever it is that they need so that those issues can be resolved. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you this morning. I will send you the opportunity. I'll send you the link and the opportunity to chat with you. Should you need any help or assistance, please come through to me. You can go, as I said earlier, onto our website and download your free ebook, and to see also what we offer: one-day programs, lots of leadership, staff development stuff, leadership retreats, lots of coaching, we'd love to work with you moving forward. So have a fantastic Tuesday. It's the most beautiful, beautiful weather here in Australia. I see some of you are in Fiji. I see some of you in South Africa. I see 2 of you from the States. So welcome to our webinars, and it's been absolutely wonderful working with you this morning. Have a fantastic day, and until next time, God bless. Take care.